Hi, Restoration. I'm Daniel Morgenstern. If you haven't met me, I am the student director and small groups coordinator here at Restoration. And I'm so excited to have you guys here at our Pursuing Jesus' Normal, Jesus' Different Normal webinar. And I've got this guy right next to me that you might not recognize. His name's Ryan Ford. I want to give him a chance to introduce himself in a second, but it's important that we both that everyone knows where we're coming from. So outside of my work, I'm a single guy. I've got my family with three brothers, and I live here in Apple Valley, Minnesota. I enjoy kind of outdoor activities and anything with a story, and that's kind of how I like to spend my time and hang out. But I do also have some other hobbies that are a little different and a little more unique. And so I like miniature painting. I've really gotten into different Japanese stories. I think they're really cool. And I think that's awesome and normal and something that God's actually placed in me. So, and we'll talk about that later. But I want to now pass it off to Ryan just to give you guys a chance to get to know him.
How's it going? I'm Ryan Fort. As Daniel said, I am the youth director over at South Suburban. And a little bit about me, I've worked with youth for over a decade in different situations, from gymnastics to camps to mentorships and some teaching. Outside of that, I'm a musician. I am a writer. I'm brother to 8 other siblings. I grew up here in Farmington, Minnesota, and then moved out to Apple Valley just about 2 years ago. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. But.
Yeah. So as you can hear, we've kind of got parts of us that kind of make sense on the packaging, and then there's parts that you might not guess. Something that I think I forgot to mention is I'm a National Guard guy, so I'm a military guy, but at the same time I enjoy kind of more artistic pursuits and things that are a little more might be considered less manly and more sensitive. And I think that's okay and normal. And that kind of leads us really nicely into our subject, or our first opening subject, which is there's all these expectations that kind of swirl around us in the world, and we wanted to call a few of those out just to showcase where some of the kind of weird ones. Do you have anyone you want to start on, Ryan?
I think just with the last year, why don't we start off with work?
Oh, yeah.
Expectations of work.
No, that's great.
Work-life balance.
Yeah, I think everyone can mention in some ways some of the expectations their job puts on them and some of the expectations of people around them on what your job means. I think something that really hit me when I was first coming into adulthood was one of the first questions I felt the need to ask, and one of the first questions was always asked of me was, hey, you'd introduce yourselves and, hey, what do you do? And that was the first thing, and it's kind of how you size each other up, right? Oh, you're a doctor, so then you're blanket, 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 blank. Oh, you're a gas station worker. Oh, then you're blanket, 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 blank. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even as a young age, that felt kind of icky to me. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about that?
I think you're right. I think a lot of times we have social structures and social ideas about how work should be and the kinds of jobs that we should have as young people all the way into adulthood and into our later years of life. I think there's a lot of ideas when you're a teenager, it's okay to work at Subway. When you're 25, it's not okay to work at Subway. Things like that, where it's why not? If it's paying the bills and if it's a job you enjoy, why not?
Yeah, I mean, the other day I was out eating with my parents, and they ran into an old friend from college who is working at the local Canes. And my parents are from California, so this is far across the country, and they've run into this guy. And but the thing is, he's managing the Canes. He actually manages multiple Canes. And if we had let our initial impression of, oh, you still work at Canes, get in our head, we might have made assumptions about this guy. But this guy was happy to be working where he was. He loved what he did. He loved managing the people around him, and that was something that brought him immense joy. And I think that's I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that's kind of where we're going. Is that these expectations usually fall short of what Jesus would actually have for us. Another one, though, that we wanted to mention, and again, maybe correctly for the pandemic, is body image. I think almost it kind of went two ways, right? You either got more in shape or less in shape with the pandemic. If you guys want to in the comments, just go ahead. If you're feeling brave, you can go ahead and type in which you feel you did. I'll tell you personally, I feel like I actually got like less in shape overall. Like there were a few points where I was doing well, but but all that again kind of ties into that those expectations and those kind of lenses that we hold. What do you think?
Yeah, I think back to like the more in shape, less in shape, I for sure got less in shape. I was like, what's the point of like doing anything right now? I'm in my apartment anyway. I'm not going anywhere for literally the next several months and maybe longer. So it's like there's some of those mental battles too, where you may be like scrolling through Instagram and seeing like your friends who are just like, oh yeah, I'm like doing home workouts and I'm like kind of like beefing up in my like home gym, and I'm just like, I'm watching TV, but that's okay. You do you, man. Honestly. Yep.
Well, and that brings up a really good point of that so many of these expectations come out of a place of comparison. Kind of we were mentioning that a little bit earlier with the jobs as well, is that we kind of size each other up constantly, and we're constantly trying to set these kind of, I don't know if you're doing this, but I know that I find myself doing this, where I'm constantly kind of saying to myself of like, who's winning right now? Like, I'll be in the middle of a conversation and talking about like what's going on in my life, and almost going like, okay, so I had this awesome thing happen at work, and this awesome thing happened in my personal life, and they're like struggling in this, so I'm winning. And I think we can all like agree that that's really a gross way to be thinking about it. Like, who cares if somebody is like winning at life? And that assumes that there's this one arrival point, that there's this one place that we're all shooting for. I mean, something that's like really big that again with like body image, for instance, that gets hit is there's this idea that like, hey, if you're a young person and if you don't look like this, you're failing, and you're not going to find anyone, and you're not going to, no one will love you, and all these like weird things that have nothing to do. I think all of us would agree that like assuming that someone would, that you're going to feel love or not based off of how you look is again a really gross thing to think about, and yet we internalize these things. We believe them about ourselves, and we believe them about others.
And there's even with the body image specifically, I think it's so easy to get caught up because there's so many ways to think about it. It is sometimes even for people who are like fit, like, are you fit enough? Or are you eating the right foods? Are you like all these different things that go into that body image? And this may be getting a little ahead of us, but like at the end of the day, like, are you able to do the tasks day to day and like finish it? Like, are you able to like physically and like mentally complete the things that like you have day to day? And like if you can do that, like, who's to say otherwise about that?
And kind of again jumping off of what Ryan is saying, it's a kind of an endless thing. There is no end point, right? I've met some of the guys that were like in the best shape of their life, but they're still like going like, oh well, my triceps aren't quite there yet, or sometimes they're critical or they're sensitive about things that they really can't change, right? Like, oh well, my eyes are horrible, or my face is goofy, and it's like, dude, like, if you spend all your time looking at how the rest of the world perceives you and letting the rest of the world dictate what is valuable and what is not, you're going to be in this ever-chasing battle or this ever-running race to get somewhere that, again, the finish line just keeps changing.
Yeah.
So, Here, we might have to cut this out real quick. So pause, and go. So in any case, that's something that is just frustrating, and we see that throughout the world. One last thing that I think we kind of touched on, and this is something that I get really passionate about actually, because I think it demolishes so many lives, is expectations about romance, and this isn't just a world thing. This is like something that the church specifically does really poorly. Like, what do you got? With that?
Yeah, this is. So growing up in the church, there's often this stigma, this idea that once you hit a certain age, you should be either like dating to marry, or you should be engaged, or you should be married. And a lot of times that seems to happen around those late teens, early 20s. Once you hit like mid 20s, and people are like, "Why aren't you married?" And it's like, well, I am only like 25. Why do I need to be married? Like, what is that drive coming from? What is I suppose the purpose of that all the time? I agree that marriage is a wonderful thing, and I've seen some really great marriages, and I've also seen some marriages that really struggle because maybe they came about it the wrong way. And then there's other people that I think, maybe they weren't called to marriage, and they kind of just forced themselves into it. There's a calling to singlehood and a calling to marriage. And I think sometimes it's a life stage. I think God can call us to singlehood for a period of life and then to be married a different period of life. But I think some people are also called to one of those things kind of indefinitely.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Again, there's this thing of there's this assumption that everyone, if they could, would be married, and for some people, that's not going to be the case. I mean, even in the secular world, we're starting to see a little bit of a rebellion against this, and there's some people that are rebelling in a way that's maybe we don't like it in the church, but they're saying things like, well, I don't ever plan to be married. I just, I'll have romantic relationships. But again, even they're still falling into the trap that that everyone should have that as a component of their life, that romance is just the default setting. And then I think this is really destructive in both cases, right? You've got, I don't know if you've heard this term, but there's this whole community online of very angry young men that are they're called incels, involuntary celibates, and they feel like society has cheated them of something because they can't find a partner, and I think that is sad in multiple ways, because on the one hand, it's sad that these guys are angry that they're not living up to the world's standards, or that something's not happening in the world's standards. But it's sad that they feel anger about that at all, that they can't feel contentment with their life where it's at, that they feel like they're missing something. And on the church's side, we have something that's just as broken. I know that as a 25-year-old guy, I already have several of my friends or several of my peers that have gotten married and divorced because they rushed into it. They went way too quickly and they jumped into marriages. And I don't know I can't speak 100% to all of their marriages, but my guess would be that part of it was that pressure to find someone, to be with something, and especially in that early stage of kind of how we do growing up as Christians, we get a lot of pressure as young Christians to start looking around. It's like kind of the one, I don't know, like Christians don't really do drinking and they don't do, other crazy things, but the one crazy thing that's like allowed is like the dating game. And so we eat it up. We get so excited about it, like, oh, who's dating who? And so even at young ages, we kind of get all excited about that. And I think it pushes people to assume that there is one path, like, oh, I have to do this, otherwise I'm broken.
Yeah, bouncing off of that, I know in college that was something that I kind of entered college with this idea of like, oh, now I'm at this stage in life where I should be dating and I should be finding a wife and I should be ready for that. And I went into a couple different relationships in college just with a bad mindset, because it wasn't about finding someone who compliments you well specifically. It wasn't even really about finding the person that God would want you to like travel through life with, because it's a partnership. It's not a servitude. It's not like some sort of hierarchy, I guess. It's a partnership. You guys are supposed to work together to do what God is calling you to. And when you come together, of course, He'll call you to things as a couple and still things as individuals. But being able to complement each other and encourage each other in those things. And so going in college, like I didn't have those ideas, and it wasn't healthy, and I wasn't always seeking like, oh, is this like specifically like, does God want us doing these things together? It was more like, oh, I'm going to find someone so I can marry them, so I can check that off the box of lists that I have from growing up, because that's just what you do when you grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into our like kind of where we're going, which is we all, and I think it came up in all of the different things we were talking about, that there are these like quiet, like subliminal lists that we're all carrying around of like what needs to happen in my life. I have to, when I'm younger, I've got to look this way. I've got to find these relationships. I've got to be at this point with my education. I got to be at this point with my career. When I get to this age, I've got to be at this point in my career. I should be at this point having, a family and kids. I need to get a house at this point. That's something that's getting really frustrated right now with the world we live in. And so we have all these like check boxes of what's normal. Like, what does a normal, successful person do with their life? And inevitably, all of us fail it. Like, every single one of us fails the check boxes, and even the people that do succeed on most of it find that a lot of times it doesn't make them happy. Like the success, the like roadmap to what a normal good life is seems to be this weird dream that doesn't work. And something that has been in politics a lot is this talk about like, is the American dream feasible, right? And the American dream is really a big part of this checklist, right? And we're having this conversation right now of like, is this something that people can achieve? And there's this kind of underlying current in that conversation of everyone should be able to achieve it, or everyone should want it. And again, the thing is, for some people, like, not everyone wants a family. Not everyone should want a family. Not everyone should want a 20-year career. Not everyone should want a marriage or should want a house necessarily. Everyone's life, we say these things in our schools and to our young children about how everyone's unique and everyone has their own path, but then we really sell the opposite by saying actually everyone should go one way. So leading into our next point is that, like, well, if this like list of how to do things is a lie and it leaves us sad and empty, how do I do life? How do I decide what I'm like, what is good, what is normal, what is right? And I think first off, you gotta take that word normal and throw it out the window. But kind of the more important thing, and what we believe here in the church, is that what Jesus gives us is contrary to maybe what a lot of people have been taught in the church, is the freedom to do whatever. Like, not whatever as in like any action. There's certain like sin that is cut off, but like the path you take in life, Jesus gives you the freedom to confidently pursue that wherever it goes. So Ryan, what do you think? Like, what do you got with that?
So I think a lot of times when it comes to scripture, we kind of see some of our patriarchs and we think, we've got Moses, we've got David, we've got of course Jesus and Paul and these other people who they did miraculous things, and then we kind of put them on the pedestal of like, hey, like in the church, if we didn't do something like that big, or if we don't feel like we can, then like what are we supposed to do? Like, are we even kind of worth it in that little journey? And I think we also forget about all the things they went through in between those miraculous moments. Like, they weren't always like at the pinnacle of career or at the pinnacle of ministry or at the pinnacle of life and living. Like, they had hard times. And if you read through like the entirety of any one of those stories, you'll see there's a lot of downs. And so it's important for us to also remember there's ups and downs, and there's other things to keep track of while we're pursuing the things that God wants us to.
Okay, pause for a second to wake this up. I'm not happy with how it's doing that, but yeah, I think that's an awesome reality to think about. That like our examples, the people that are put forward as our markers, or the people that we are like be like them, are oftentimes people that failed horribly, right? Or didn't get off the ground for a long time, right? A great example is like Joseph, right? Yeah. He is getting beat up all along the way. He's sold into slavery. He's in slavery and he's kind of making it up. He's getting there. He's doing better, and then suddenly he's thrown into jail. And then he finds. Or he's in jail for a long time, and he's pulled out of jail to talk to Pharaoh. Man, new heights. But then his family shows up and all the family drama. And so he's constantly getting assailed. Moses was a murderer and had to go into hiding for a good chunk of his life. I mean, most of his young life, he's out in the wilderness. He doesn't come back until he's like a full-grown man. We've got people like Gideon, who really just felt like he was a nobody and a nothingness, and he constantly had to be reminded that no, God has called you. You're gonna do good things, but he kept doubting. He kept being afraid. And then I mean, if you're talking about a list like this and you leave off Samson, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, Samson is just one big list of a guy who is doing his own thing and just dropping the ball over and over again. And it's not really even until like the end of his life that he is fully repentant. He continues to live a life of brokenness, and yeah, he's used by God even in that, but if you look at him, he's kind of a jerk, and he makes mistakes about his relationships. The woman that he loves betrays him. And so all these examples, all these people are people that like lived through or lived in opposition to what the people of their day would have said was a good life, right? Like an Egyptian or a Hebrew wouldn't have looked at Moses and gone, man, that guy's living a good life. He's living if they were talking with Moses, they'd be feeling like, I'm winning, right? If a random Egyptian was talking to Moses, he'd be like, well, this guy's a piece of trash. I'm winning. My life is going better. But of those two people, some random Egyptian or Moses, who do we remember? Who do we actually talk about thousands of years later? The path to success, the path to immortality, the path to, and really the path to ultimately being utilized and being happy with God is not standard.
Yeah. I think kind of bouncing off of that, when you think about all those journeys, the one thing that is constant is each of them were looking for God and seeking what God wanted, and none of them expected where it would take them. And I mean, I suppose perhaps the one is Moses maybe wasn't exactly looking for God when he came across him in the desert and came across the flaming bush, but after that, his journey with God, he was, God, what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do in this situation? And yeah, he failed in different spaces, and he continued to fail in different spaces all the way to the end of his life. But he didn't know where God was taking him, but he kept seeking what that would be and what that next step was and where that would go.
And something that also kind of jumps to mind, we don't know these things for sure, but a lot of those characters, including characters like the Apostle Paul, Mary of Magdalene, Deborah, all these characters in the Bible, all these figures, a lot of them are single their entire lives. They're not married. They don't have a family. And so to put many of these people are, right? Abraham is clearly married and loves his wife, right? We've got Joseph, who I believe is later on does have a wife. So we do have, but for a lot of these people, marriage isn't the center of their life story. There's other things that happen. And so that's not something that if we're missing that from our lives, oh, we're broken, we can't do anything. But there's another kind of aspect to this I also want to talk about, that freedom piece of Jesus, right? Jesus frees us from feeling, first of all, feeling like we're failing or feeling like we're falling behind. And that's what we've been talking about right now. But he also frees us from feeling like we have to go a certain route. Again, with all these characters, they are very different characters. They pursue God in very different ways. They lead armies, they lead the nation, they preach, they serve as loyal followers, and they serve as warriors. They are all across the map, and I think even like when we see in Paul's letters when he's talking to the church, we actually see that Jesus believes in that the church is a whole body, right? That has many parts and many different ways of following God. And I think those kinds of passages get me the most excited, because what it kind of hints at and what it tells us is that there are so many different roads to follow God. There's so many different roads to honor God. And I don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's multiple roads to salvation, right? You still have to believe in Jesus Christ, the risen Savior. But the ways that you can serve him are larger than you can count. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to like how you can serve God, I know working with youth these last years it's been such a journey, because every young person is looking for like, what am I supposed to do? What am I going to do? Some people have it figured out. Like there's a lot of kids I've come across where they're just like, oh, I'm going to do this, and they've got like their 5-year plan, their 10-year plan. I'm like, you go. Like if that's what like God's put on your heart, you go for it. And like all the power to you, like blessings on that. And then there's a lot of people I come across who are just like, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. Like I don't know what I'm going to do for college. I don't even know what I want to do like for a potential career. I don't even know where I want to even start with a job. And I think a lot of times we allow that to become kind of an inhibitor, because we think, well, going back to kind of our earlier conversation, like I have to have this sort of job or this sort of career to be a successful person in America. And the reality isn't that, because when you come in relationship with God and when he's bringing you to these different places, he's going to bring you to some of the craziest places that you never could have even planned for. I think, if you don't mind, I got a story from even yesterday. Like I was, I took the morning off from work and ended up feeling prompted to go to this park nearby my place. And I was like, I don't know why, but like I felt it deeply, and I knew that it was more than just like, oh, I want to sit at a park, because that happens too. I like sitting at parks sometimes. But this was a little bit different. And I was like, okay, like I'll go to this park, God. Like I don't know what you're doing, but I'll be there. And I show up, I sit at this table, and I started checking my emails because my brain was going a million miles an hour, and I just had to do something. So sitting there, and this young dude walks up, and I kind of glanced at him, and I was like, I just noticed that he was there, gave him a little nod. He sat down like on the other side of this pavilion from me, okay? And then we're sitting there for, gosh, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 minutes. And he goes, hey, do you know what time it is? And I was like, oh, it's just about noon. Like 5 minutes till noon. And he says, oh, okay, cool. And as I said that, I also looked at him kind of for the first time since he walked up. Like I said, I glanced over earlier, but didn't take in too much aside from the fact that he was a young guy. All there is to it. But when I looked over this time, I noticed he had a backpack with him. He had a Cub Foods bag full of clothes. He had a plastic bag from Holiday. And I was like, do you mind if I like ask what your situation is? Like, what's up? And he was like, I've been homeless the last year. I was like, okay. Do you mind sharing how that ended up happening? And he ended up going on to tell me kind of like his whole life story and how he got to being in Apple Valley, Minnesota, and homeless on the street. And I was just like, okay, this is kind of crazy, but I think I'm starting to get why God brought me here today. I think I know like I'm supposed to be here for this kid, and I don't know what that means yet, but I'm going to be here. I ended up spending from that moment all the way until I think it was 11:30 that evening when his mom showed up. And she came to pick him up. She drove from out of state to come get him, and she's moving into Minnesota. But He was waiting there all day so that he could get that ride. And I knew, like, after meeting him and kind of talking through some of the stuff, I was like, God, you want to talk to this kid. I know that. And so through the whole day, I'm praying, like, God, what do you want him to know? What do you want to say to him? And how can I do that? So I bought him a small lunch. We shared a lot of stories about life, some of the things that I've experienced, some of the things he's experienced, favorite music, all that kind of stuff. I just kind of hung out until his mom had come around. And by the time she came around, got to meet her a little bit and send him off well. And so it's like just one of those moments where you never know what God's going to do if you're willing to let him lead you.
Yeah. All right. Do that. Wake it up. It's so nice. Yeah, I mean, that is an amazing story, and I think it really illustrates our point of that, like, others might ask, like, man, you spend a whole day with some random person that you might never see again, and the question, for that person is like that is so weird. Like, how, like, what they're thinking is like, how does that even factor into the checklist, right? He spent a whole day with talking to someone, and they might think like, oh, well, if that makes him happy, okay, whatever, but that's not for me because that's weird, right? But the thing is, like, God calls us to so many different ways, and it might not be for you, but the part that, like, it kind of, the part that's destructive, and the part that separates us and makes us all isolated in this little rat race of competing, is when we start putting labels on what's normal and what's strange, right? Something might not be for you, but it might, but that doesn't mean that it's weird or wrong or out of the ordinary. And the thing is, I think for most of us, to spend a day just out of the blue with someone and just loving on them would actually be a net positive on our lives. Something kind of a similar story for me, just in the short term, was that I was kind of planning a hangout with some of my buddies. Where I mentioned earlier, I'm into miniature painting, so you take these little models and with a tiny brush, you sit there and you paint. And so I had invited over a few different buddies to try and do that. And kind of as a last second thing, invited one more of my buddies who had never done it before. And basically all my other buddies canceled except for the one guy I invited over at the last second. And so he makes it over, and we're painting and sitting there. But as we're painting, we're talking about life, and we're talking about just the state of the world around us. And after a little bit, we ended up getting on the subject of, like, how are we supposed to live? Like, how are we supposed to live a life honoring God? And so, I mean, we're sitting down, we're miniature painting, and we didn't sit down with the intention of, like, oh, this is going to be a Bible study. Like, we're going to talk about, like, how we can honor God. We're just talking about life. But the thing is, because we're both in this life to honor Jesus, it just naturally came out. Because we're both in this life to try and figure out what we are to do and how we're going to do it. Like, we're both young guys trying to figure out our life. I'm a little further on than he was. We got on the subject of how are we going to live life. And the cool thing too is that we were talking about how, just to really reinforce, this was after me and Ryan were kind of talking through and planning this talk, and I wasn't even really thinking to bring it up to this guy, but we ended up basically talking about it and talking about, like, hey, maybe the 9 to 5 isn't for everyone. Maybe the 9 to 5 isn't what God calls you to. Maybe having a house isn't what God calls you to. Maybe a traditional family isn't. My parents trained missionaries, and let me tell you, you hear missionary and you think, oh, I know what that is. That's like you go overseas and you plant churches, you give out Bibles. But even under that umbrella term of missionary, there's so many different types. There are people that are going and they are helping with hurricane relief. They're helping with disaster relief. There are people that are here in the States that are going to different cities here in the States, and they're still missionaries, even though they're not going overseas. There's people that are going to other countries, and they are in fact going overseas, but they're actually not planting churches. They're training local pastors to do that. So they're one person that drops in, and 50 pastors come to them. There's people that go over to just be school teachers and business owners, and then on the side kind of do church and do different ways of leading people to Christ. But as many ways as you can think, there are missionaries. From, on the one hand, someone that goes and plants a traditional white, little white church, to, on the other hand, a person that's flying an airplane and dropping stuff out the side. And so that's just under the umbrella of missionary. And the same goes for any profession, right? We all know that when you really dig down to it, no profession is as simple as it sounds, right? When we say construction worker, there's like a billion flavors of what a construction worker does. And why would we think that life is not like that, right? Why would we think that life is, I go and I be a construction worker and that means these things and that's that? That doesn't make sense. Just to kind of maybe highlight a few things, something that like jumps out to me is my younger brother, Tim, actually. He's looking at becoming a police officer right now. That's a tough job to go into right now, and yet he's not going into police work for what you kind of think he's going into. Like, yeah, he's going to have to do his role as a beat cop, and he's going to have to do all the like leading up to things. But what he wants to do is communication on their behalf. He wants to be the guy that's the public relations officer. And so when you hear that he's going to become a police officer, you think certain things. You don't think maybe running a Facebook account. And so again, this idea of normal is weird. And the thing is, Tim can honor God greatly by being a public relations officer for the police. We can all honor God greatly in our individual lanes. And the thing is, what God wants of you is that he wants you to pursue the passions of your heart. He wants you to pursue things that jive you and that get you to want to get up in the morning. He doesn't want you to slog along for a normal job. Like if your job is like, I don't know, quote unquote normal, I don't think there is, I think what we're saying here is there is no such thing. But if your job is something that's more the standard of what society says, we're not knocking that. There are people that are called to that. The point is if you are in a job right now that you feel like, man, I'm in this normal job and I need to stay here because this is what's expected of me and this is how I'm going to make a living. But you're not happy. You're not passionate about it. You're not able to give the overflow. If you're in that kind of job, I mean, we encourage you, like, try and take a step out if you can. And kind of on that note, I have a longer term story as well. So I actually didn't go to school to be, a youth director. I didn't go to school to be a full-time minister. That wasn't the plan, right? That's not how I thought I was going to do my life. I was actually going through school with the full intention of doing the military. I'm a National Guard member currently, and I was going, even as I was going through college, I was still doing National Guard. And my plan from day one when I showed up at the school was, I'm going to keep doing military, like through college and then after college. I'm going to go full time the moment I'm done with college. And the reason I was at college was just to open up doors to maybe like do more stuff with the military later because I needed a degree. And so literally when I was at school and as I was going through school, at one point I was sitting in a chapel service because I went to a Christian college. We actually went to the same college. North Central University. Woo, go Rams. But I was singing in a chapel service, and I just heard the whisper of the Spirit going, "Hey, what if I asked you to become a pastor?" And this was actually years before I'd even heard of Restoration. I hadn't even, I couldn't point to a map and say, "Oh, this is where it is." I had no idea. And I just hear the whisper, like, "What if I asked you to be a pastor?" And I start getting this kind of image of like what it would look like. And I like, again, big, strong army man, I break down sobbing because my plan was this. Now I feel like God might be calling me to this. I'm not ready. I'm terrified. Like, how am I supposed to do that? That's not the normal thing to do. You're not supposed to go through school with one plan and, like, the year that you're about to graduate, get a different one. Like, that's terrifying. How are you supposed to do that? And so I was literally sobbing, and I actually had a friend come by and be like, "Hey, are you okay?" and prayed with me, and was a great friend. But literally, I remember a few days later, I'd kind of recovered, and they were still concerned because they're like, "You look terrified." And the thing was, at the time, I didn't. I continued with the plan. I kept going with the military thing, but I was on deployment overseas, and I get a call that, hey, this Restoration Covenant Church, they're looking for a youth guy, and I had been thinking about how, I have some free time available. I can maybe do that for a short time. But as I was talking with Restoration, as I was talking with Pastor Rob, I was kind of feeling more and more like, you know what? I need to go here a little longer, actually. I need to be here a little longer. So God took me on a non-normal path. I didn't go to school for a pastoral thing. I have a Bible minor. That's the best I got. I'm an English major, right? Real helpful. But again, God leads us in directions that are not always standard. And I've grown immensely at Restoration, and I've had immense joy. And I don't know if I continued along the same path I'd planned, and I'd come back from the military and gone straight into full-time military service, I really think I would have lost out on huge chunks of my life now. Like, I would have lost out on something that is precious to me, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So. All right, wake up. All right, there we go. Still talking. All right, start.
Cool. Yeah, I think going off of that, as far as like kind of a longer term trajectory, I think God works in our lives through so many different phases. I like to think about, when you're growing up in the church, people say like, oh, well, what's your testimony? And a lot of times we think about like, oh, when was the day that I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna follow Jesus, and now I'm a Christian. But it's like, it's so much more than that. Your testimony it's a testament. It's literally like telling people what's happened, what you've seen, like what's gone on in your life. And so with that idea in mind, you gotta think like your testimony it starts before the moment that you make the decision, and it continues after that moment. And so when I think about like my life, I grew up in a Christian family. I was very blessed that way, and I made a decision when I was young. And when I was in my early teens, I ended up making kind of a second and more final decision, where I had prayed like one of those dangerous prayers where you're just like, God, I don't know what's going to happen in life. And I don't know that I actually like care what's going to happen, but I want you to decide like where you want me. Put me where you want me. Bring me wherever it is. Like if it's, and this is the part that scared me actually, because I thought he would do it. I said, if it's off to Africa, bring me to Africa. And someday I might end up there, but I was like, when I was like 13, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I want to go to Africa, but like, God, if you really want to bring me there, you can bring me to Africa. And like, it was just that like moment of surrender where I decided at an early age that like, I wanted to see what God would do. I wanted to see, and I didn't want to be held back by the potential like decisions of life. Like I didn't want to say, oh, this is the career, this is the thing, because that's what I've decided. I wanted God to like really bring me through those moments. One of the things that was kind of a constant was I was largely into music, and I around that same age was like, hey God, like bring me out to the bars. I want to tell people about you, but I want to do it in a way that's a little different. I want to tell them about you by singing songs that they wouldn't suspect are about you. And I want to tell them stories about life that include you in a way that they wouldn't say like, oh, this guy's just talking about Jesus. Like I want to talk about you and then talk with them and see what is their life, what is their situation, how can I like connect with them, how can I show them your love and who you are. And from there, like he took me to a music school, and I was able to go for 2 years for a lyric and composition degree. And after that, I was kind of like, this is really expensive, so I don't think I can actually go on to like finish this degree. So God, I guess like take me where you want me to be. And that's when he brought me over to North Central, and I ended up going for a music pastor degree. And through that process, I was able to get a little more in touch with like what does it mean to like seek the Spirit? What does it mean to listen to the Spirit? Because there's so many times where I think we all get these promptings, but we don't always understand like that is like God talking. I don't know if any of you know the band The Newsboys, but they were a band I really appreciated when I was younger, and they had this song that said, if you feel a prompting, it's the Holy Spirit coming through, teleprompting you, you know? And so it was one of those lines that just kind of like stuck with me. I was like, what does that actually like mean? Like, what does it mean to be like teleprompted by the Holy Spirit? And as I've gotten older and like started to understand that more, like for me, it happens with kind of this gut feeling, like what happened yesterday. This is gut feeling of you should be here, you need to go here. And most of the time, I couldn't even tell you why, but every time I am more than elated that I actually went and did it. I am like stoked because I always come away with these amazing experiences and meet so many people and are just I'm able to share just a moment of like God's peace and love with them. And I couldn't tell you where it goes. Like that's up to God. Like where he takes them and takes what happened in those moments is up to him. But I did my best to do my piece. Like he called me, I went. And kind of in that same line, like while I was at North Central in a chapel, of course, I felt called to go to Greece. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Like I've never even thought about Greece before, but okay, like God, if you really want me to go to Greece, I'll go. I ended up spending 2.5 months abroad between a ministry in Greece that was raising awareness for human trafficking and spending time investing in college students to being with a camp in Austria that was spending time with middle school and high school students and just like teaching them about the word and pouring into them as people. And from there, God is just taking me on like journey after journey, because every time I look at it, I say, you know, God, you know the things I need. You know the things I need to survive. But I'm going to trust you with wherever you bring me. Like if you want to bring me across the globe, bring me there. If you want to bring me downtown, bring me there. If you want me to stay right here, just let me know. But like I want to be in your plan. I want to be in your path, because mine's not going to get me anywhere good.
Yeah, I think there's like a few things I really want to hit on that you hear in that. Is that first off, that surrender. If you're going like, hey, I have passions and I have things I care about, but God, use them as you will. Like, take me where you're going to take me. He will take you on amazing places. Just saying, there was like this movie, Yes Man, where the guy just says yes to everything, right? And it's almost like that. It's not quite that, but it really is a thing of like, what could you say yes to today? What relationship time could you say yes to? What like kind of scary opportunity could you say yes to? What change in schedule or change in like how you do your daily rhythms could you say yes to? It's a lot of Christians present things as this big no, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But that's not Jesus. I don't think that's Jesus for a minute. No. Jesus is one big do this instead. Like do this awesome thing instead. It will make you happier. We all know that, we all know just instinctually that like money can't buy you happiness. A job can't get you happiness. A relationship can't get you happiness. But we all keep pursuing that. Like we say it with our mouths that like, a marriage won't make me just necessarily happy, right? A marriage isn't going to solve all my problems. It's going to be hard work. But then when it actually happens, we don't believe ourselves. We think that like, oh, these physical things are gonna fix it for us. And what Jesus is saying is, don't pursue that. Pursue something else. And then the other thing I wanted to really like hit on, and I think it was in both of our stories, is God used our passions, our natural inbuilt things that we like to do. He used music for Ryan, and he used this like miniature painting for me, right? And music is a little more obvious, but the miniature painting, you probably wouldn't think like, oh, how is that going to be used by God, right? But the thing is, you have passions right now that draw you together with other people and that draw you towards excellence. And whenever there's excellence, God is there. And so if you can do the things that you care about, if you can ask Jesus, how can you integrate into this? How can I use this for you? You'll be surprised to find that just about everything that you care about can be honoring to God. Just about every last thing. I don't think there's, heck, I might even go so far, tell me in the comments if you don't think so, but I might go so far as to say, hey, you're super into like drinking competitions. I could even see that in some ways. The point is, when we do things with God in mind and with relationship in mind, God is there. God is pleased. God is honored. And if we say no to those things, we're going to miss out on opportunities. Like missionaries didn't get to dropping stuff out of airplanes by saying, no, we're going to do it the way that everyone else has done it. No, somebody took a risk and tried something new, and it worked. And so we encourage you, and that's kind of where we want to leave off. We want to challenge you. What is something that you can take a risk on? What is something that you care about already that you can give to God? What's something that you've been kind of thinking about doing, a change you've been thinking about doing, or a place that you felt stuck that you can like move away from or move to? You've got opportunities right now in your life that are just like a little bit away from your face, and you just need to look around. Jesus will provide those for you.
And I would say, just kind of to top that off, like as you're seeking those things and thinking about what are those things that God could use, I mean, 100% spend time in prayer, but don't be afraid to wait. I think sometimes we expect an answer right away, and there are so many things that I prayed about, and there wasn't a response for a couple of years even. And so you just never know. God moves in mysterious ways, but he's always putting pieces in place for where he wants you to go next, as long as you're willing to follow that. So.
Yeah, so we encourage you, follow Jesus' normal. The world's normal sucks. Jesus' normal brings you involved. We don't need to compete with one another. We're all in this life together, and Jesus has wonderful plans for each of us, and those plans don't all look the same. Yeah. So we encourage you, look for those in your life. We thank you for tuning in. Wherever you've tuned in from, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to see in the chat where you tuned in from. Let us know where you're watching this from. And if you got any questions, we would love to answer them. I'll be on to answer any questions you got. And yeah, feel free to just type those in the chat or send me an email at danielmorgenstern@restorationcove.org. So yeah, Ryan, is there anywhere they can reach you?
I suppose if you wanted to send an email, my email is ryanmfort@gmail.com. I'm always willing to connect or answer questions or give you a little encouragement if you're just kind of like not sure what's up in life. So yeah.
All right. Well, I want to give a real quick thank you to Ryan. Thanks for coming in and chatting with us. And thank you all for signing in. We hope this encouraged you. We hope this gave you the tools to jump forward. See ya. I love how that worked out.